We are on our final of the I Am series in John's Gospel, the 15th chapter. Going to be reading verses 1 through 17. Going to be reading the New International Version this morning. Listen to the Word of God. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He lopes off every branch that doesn't produce, and he prunes those branches that bear fruit for even larger crops. He's already tended you by pruning you back for strength and usefulness by means of the commands I gave you. Take care to live in me live in you. For a branch can't produce fruit when severed from the vine, nor can you be fruitful apart from me. Yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever lives in me and I in him shall produce a large crop of fruit. For apart from me, you can't do a thing. If anyone separates from me, he is thrown away like a useless branch, withers, and is gathered into a pile with all the others and burned. But if you stay in me and obey my commands, you may ask any request you like, and it'll be granted. My true disciples produce bountiful harvests. This brings great glory to my Father. I have loved you even as the Father has loved me. Live within my love. When you obey me, you are living in my love, just as I obey my Father and live in his love. I have told you this so that you will be filled with my joy. Yes, your cup of joy will overflow. I demand that you love each other as much as I love you. And here is how to measure it. The greatest love is shown when a person lays down his life for his friends. And you are my friends if you obey me. I no longer call you slaves, for a master doesn't confide in his slaves. Now you are my friends, proved by the fact that I have told you everything the Father told me. You didn't choose me, I chose you. I appointed you to go and produce lovely fruit always, so that no matter what you ask for from the Father using my name, he will give it to you. I demand that you love each other. Wow. Thus ends the reading of God's holy word to us. In the 15th chapter of John's Gospel, Jesus tells us that if we want to find wholeness of life, abundance of life, then we must become attached to God the way a branch is attached to a vine. And those who were living in the time of Jesus would understand immediately what he was talking about. Wouldn't have been a problem, because grapevines were growing everywhere in the Holy Land, even today. I can remember one particular visit that we had when we were sitting out on the patio of a hotel where we were going to have like a question and answer period and have some lectures after our days of touring in the Holy Land of all the special sites of interest for biblical students. And the thing that was so striking about it was that there was a huge grapevine that ran around the patio. It was amazing. It was the time of the year when the grapes were in season, and so as we sat there, I can remember sitting in there on that lovely, cool evening. We could talk about this 15th chapter of John's Gospel with the beautiful grapes hanging all around us to remind us how deep this image is. In fact, those of you who visit the Holy Land today will see it everywhere in Israel. It's a symbol, it's a sign. We saw it on the sides of some of the cars. We saw it on office buildings and other places. Remember, there was two men carrying a pole between their shoulders, and in between them there was this huge bunches of grapes hanging from the pole. And you will remember from your earliest days in Sunday school how Moses, remember, sent out the spies to the Holy Land to see what kind of place it was going to be, and they came back with this one huge branch of grapes so large that they had to be carried on a pole between two men as a sign of how rich the land really was. And that symbol has become the symbol of the office of tourism today in Israel. So that you will see these signs all around you, reminding you of how important the grapevine is to the life and the economy of the people. So when Jesus used this image, those who were hearing it for the first time, they would fully understand what he was talking about. And I think we all want wholeness of life, don't we? We want to produce rich fruit with our life. And Jesus says that in order to do this, we have to be attached to the main vine, because it is in the life of the vine that gives us life. And if we become detached in any point of our life from the vine, we wither and die. This is what Jesus is saying here. But when we are attached to the vine, the life of the vine flows through us and produces the rich fruit that we want to do. But the striking thing about the 15th chapter of John is that when Jesus starts talking about how we remain attached to God, guess what? He doesn't talk about prayer. He doesn't talk about meditation. He doesn't talk about worship or these things. He talks about loving others. So often in his teaching, he returns to this theme over and over again. And one of the best ways to show our love for God is to position ourselves in a way to love others. And what this seems to do is to open up channels within us, which makes it possible for God's life to flow through us and move within us. But the most striking thing about this particular chapter is that when Jesus talks about loving others, he does not talk about the poor. He does not talk about the oppressed and those who are suffering out in the world. On other occasions, he does. Absolutely. He talks about them. And it's important to love those who are suffering in the world. But that's not what he talks about in this chapter. Now, if you can picture the love that was being felt in the upper room, remember on the night that Jesus died, they were all together in the upper room. If you can picture that, Jesus and his disciples on that last night of his life, and the doors are closed, they are together there, and what Jesus says to them is, love each other. Love one another. Love the people who are close to us, is what he's saying. And first of all, it's the members of our own family, your friends. Jesus talks a lot about friends in this chapter. The members of your religious community, which is really, I hope, your expanded family here. You know, we miss each other when we're not together. We care and we love each other. People that are close to us. That's what we need to hear, and that's what Jesus is saying here. In Thornton Wilder's Our Town, Emily, she just can't stand to watch her family living as they do, and she cries out in protest, "We don't have time to look at one another." And that, of course, is the way it is for many of us, despite our good intentions. Or we get to the point where we take each other for granted, and there's no real communication, no caring taking place. Arthur Miller's play, After the Fall, Quentin is a very successful lawyer, been married for 7 years to Louise. It's not a good relationship. It's not a good marriage. And they're talking about it, and he says, he says to her, "In 7 years, Louise, we have never had a meeting. Never. Never what you would call a meeting." And they begin to talk about it, and you realize that they've been living together and doing the things that married couples do when they live together, but they had never had a meeting. There had been no real communication, no caring for each other. And this happens so often in the family with the people who are close to us. But what Jesus is doing in this particular chapter is calling us to look at each other, to have a meeting with the people who are closest to us, to be able to love those who are closest to us in a life-enhancing way. Well, how do we do this? Well, one way is by listening. I've really been impressed to learn from Jesus how he listened to people. By listening, we show that we really care. We get to know the person, the uniqueness of the person. And most striking of all, by listening to another person, we somehow release power and life within them. It's a very healing thing to have someone listen to us, isn't it? And we can tell when people are really listening. To really be present to you in this way. And we all need to work on this, But there's another way. And this is what I really want to talk about most about this morning for the time that we have together. I call it simply calling forth the gifts of the other person. One of the striking things about Jesus is that he did not seem to be trying to put something into the people. He seemed to be calling forth something out of them. When he called to be his disciples, he called for something forth from them, to come out of them, not putting something in. That was already there. It was as if God's Holy Spirit had already placed something within their lives, and it was as if they were already having the potential to be that uniquely beautiful person. And what needed to be done was simply call forth the gift of that person that was already there. And I've thought a lot about this. I really have. And I believe one of the most valuable things that we can do for people who are close to us, our children, for example, or our parents, or our husband and wives, or our friends, is not try to put something into them, not try to shape them in some preconceived mold that we have in our mind, but to call forth their gifts. To call forth the unique, beautiful person that God created them to be. And there are 3 ways I think we can do this. And this, of course, gives all of us something very specific to think about and to work on as we try to practice our Christian love as we understand that. Jesus is saying to us here about loving one another. And one of the ways we call forth the gifts of those who are close to us is by exercising our own gift. This is something that has become very clear to me only recently, that I'm understanding in a new way how important this is to be the uniquely beautiful person God created each of us to be. Just to be the free, spontaneous self that we really are. I can remember in my life when I was with people like that. I remember a bus driver. Of all people, I can remember a bus driver when I used to take the city bus when I was probably ages 10 to 13 or 14. I would take the bus to go downtown and all of that. And I remember taking the bus in the city of Charleston, West Virginia. And I got on that bus, and I remember the bus driver was enjoying his job so much. He just enjoyed being with people on his route. I mean, it was called the Beach Avenue bus. He knew everybody that got on that bus. Every time, you stop at the corner and people get on, he would call them by name. He would say, "Hey, how's your husband? I heard he was in the hospital today. How he's doing?" On and on and on this would go. And then when I was coming back home from being downtown and I'd get off the bus at the corner of Beach Avenue and Edgewood Drive, I always remember how uplifted I felt. Just to be with somebody who was really doing his thing, really enjoying doing his thing. And it was so inspiring to me that was the first job I ever wanted to have when I got out of school. I wanted to be a bus driver, especially a Greyhound bus driver. I thought that would be the coolest job, to go over to California and back in a day, whatever that might have been. But it just excited me so much. And I remember a priest in the little village of Bethany in the Holy Land. We had the opportunity to visit with him in his shiny, sunny little apartment, a second-story apartment. The windows were open, and I remember the light breeze blowing through on that warm day. And the apartment was so full of flowers, and he talked about his duties. He was the chaplain of the chapel of Lazarus, where Lazarus' tomb was. He was right next door to it. And he talked about his life, and it was so full of joy. I remember that. And then he took us, to the chapel, and he sat down at a little organ, and he sang in a powerful baritone voice, and he just seemed to lose himself completely in his music and in his singing. I remember that experience of being with him this very day. That's years and years ago it happened. But to this very day, it lifts my spirit just to think of the man doing his thing and really enjoying his life fully and with freedom. And I can remember my preaching professor was just like that. Dr. Bauman, his love of preaching that was his, in the way in which he threw himself into his preaching, he was just doing his thing when he was preaching. And it was such an inspiration to me. So one of the most helpful things that we can do is just to be our real self. One of the things that parents can do for their children is just to show them that life is good and rich and full. And one of the things that we can do for our friends and for others is to exercise our own gifts. But there's a second thing that we can do in calling forth the gift of others, not just exercising our own gift, but giving up, and this is the tough one, giving up the attempt to control other persons. This is such a common thing for parents to try to control their children, or for husbands trying to control their wives, or wives trying to control their husbands. We try to control our friends, to manipulate, to use each other. Friends controlling, dominating, manipulating each other, trying to make the other person do what we think they ought to do. And there are so many ways we have of manipulating and controlling others. We seem to be afraid of taking our hands off of others because we're afraid that what might emerge from that. And so we try to control and to block the life of the other person. I had a friend who was a pastoral counselor, and he told some of us one time that he was working with a group of people, and the group was starting to get out of control, not going in the direction that Joe thought they should be going in. So he started to move in on it, to manipulate the group, change the process. And he heard God say to him, "Joe, take your hands off that group." Well, he did for a while. But then the same thing started to happen, and he started to move in again. And he heard the voice of God again. "Joe, take your hands off that group." Well, he did. But then it happened the third time. He was really anxious about the way the group was going, and he started to move in. And God said to him, "Joe, take your cotton-picking hands off the group." And as one of his friends put it, when God says cotton-picking, you better listen, because he's getting serious. Well, one of the things that many of us need to hear is the voice of God saying, "Take your cotton-picking hands off that child, off that friend, or off your husband, or off your wife. Don't try to control them in this way." And for some of us, it's very hard for us to relinquish this. It almost becomes a lifestyle for some of us. Parents, for example. Now this is difficult. This is a difficult issue. I'm not making fun of it. It's a difficult issue because children need discipline. And they need direction. And sometimes there's a fine line between necessary discipline and controlling and manipulating a child or another person. But we must find that line, because the attempt to control others, you see, blocks the unique gift that they have. So these are two things that we can do for those who are close to us as we love them and call forth their gifts. But this brings us to the third and last one, this last suggestion. And this probably could be the most important of all. And it's kind of hard to put into words, actually. But it just seems to me that as I look at Jesus, the way he related to other people, he was always finding ways of affirming them. And I believe that we can do that also with those who are close to us, to do everything possible we can. The words that we speak, the things that we do, the way we present to others, to affirm them as persons, to affirm their gifts, to make them feel good about themselves as persons. And the reason this is so important is that so often we do the opposite. We cut people down. There's the story of a little girl. Someone asked her age. She says, "I'm 4 years old, but there are lots of them that are only 3, he said. Well, there's just something about us that we need to know that there are lots of them that are not as good as we are. And so we proceed to cut people down. But agape love is just the opposite. It means being for the other person. It means giving of ourselves in order that other persons might be fulfilled. A love that truly affirms the other person. This is one of the most loving things that we can do with people around us. Finally, an Englishman was standing in the streets of London trying to catch a glimpse of the Queen as she passed on her way to a royal wedding. And he stood among the crowds, and he had waited all night in order to get this good vantage point. Finally, the procession came into view, and the Queen of England passed by. And as she did, the man said excitedly and with great joy, "She caught my eye and waved at me." You know, one of those funny little royal waves. Right at me. What would have been his delight had the Queen not only waved, but stopped the carriage and said, "Do come along with us. We have a splendid seat reserved for you. And then we can have lunch together." What should be our delight when the risen Christ, in all of his glory, speaks directly to the heart of each one of us, saying, "Come to me. Attach yourself to me. Be part of my life forever. I have reserved a splendid place for you. Come, abide in me." Amen.